So you'll take one dimension, which is 1. You'll take a dot, which is 0 point, and then you take 2 dots, line it up, that's 1 dimension, right? And you take 2 1 dimensions, line them up, then that will be 2 dimensions. And then you take 2 dimensions, line them up, and then that'll be 3 dimensions. If you see my thought, that's what we're doing. So what happens is with the 4th dimension, you have to take 2 cubes, line them up, and then add the corners, and then that makes a 4th dimension. So if we were to take these 2 cubes now, put them together, and then line them up, you would get something that looks like this. So here on the left, to make it easier for you, I have here a red cube in the front, and I put a blue cube in the back, and I put the green lines to show you where they're connecting. And this is basically the concept of the 4th dimension, which people have said is a concept of time. And I'll go ahead and illustrate that. So basically, when you have 2 parallel cubes from the 3rd dimension connected together, and then you have, and then there's a connection to those 2 cubes, then you have the hypercube, or what you can call the 4th dimension. So if you look at this picture I have here, I have the concept of height, width, length, which is the 3rd dimension, and then I went ahead and include the yellow arrow, which means time. So basically, when you're thinking about it, on the 4th dimension, they kind of see the connection between the past, the present moment, and the future. So everything kind of happens simultaneously. Now, from our perspective, that's kind of hard to understand because we live in the moment. We live in the moment, and that is what we experience. And even though we are kind of going through the transition of time, as we are going through the transition of time, we're experiencing it. So in essence, in the 4th dimension, we are kind of like something on a movie reel. So here's some boxes, and this is us, who are supposed to be cubes. So what happens is we experience one moment at a time. We only experience the moment. We really don't understand the past, and we really don't understand the future. We're only technically in the moment. But from a 4th dimensional perception, they would see us, like let's just say this was me right here in the yellow cube. They would technically see me right there, my consciousness is right there in the moment thinking about it, but then they can see how I'm going to go in the future, and they're going to go ahead and see how I react in the past. And I know that's a really complicated concept to understand, but when you really analyze it, you realize that we would look something like this. A goldfish. Now, when you're looking at this goldfish here, just to put more dimensions to it, I'm going to say all these goldfish is basically you and I. And then what happens is we're going to the forward, and then there is a past. But what happens is when a 4th dimensional person is looking at us, we don't look like one thing. We actually have an energy body that's connecting all of us like this green line. Obviously, the green line will go ahead into the future and go into the back. But basically, from the beginning to the end, we have like this concept of a green line going through us that's connecting to us. So even though we may seem separated based on the film that we have, when you look at the bigger picture, we would probably look like an elongated snake form, and therefore all those snake forms are connecting to each other. But we don't realize it because we're kind of chopped up in time, and we only feel like that my past and my future doesn't really have a connection to each other. But this is how they would look like. So they can see, oh, I can see what you did in the past, and I can kind of see what you're doing in the future, and I can kind of see this long connection between all your past and future. And that's why when they talk about the 4th dimension, they say it's more concept of time, because with time, you can kind of see the past and the future. In reality, we don't look separated as like a box or as a dot. We look more like a concept of a long line. Now, I know that's going to be kind of hard to accept, especially because we're 3rd dimensional. But let me go ahead and give you how we would give you another analogy from the opposite end. So here you see an apple. So as you can see with this apple, you see it has width, height, and it has width, height, length, and then you can see that there's a width to the apple, which is dimensions. But how would this apple appear on the 2nd dimension? So when you realize that we have to kind of like look at the concept of chopping the apples up, because what happens is as you press down this third dimensional concept into pieces of paper, it's not going to have width to it. It's just going to be width and height, which would just come through in like little chops of pieces of paper. So technically, if there was a flat land of, let's just say, a pieces of paper, or something on two-dimensional, and here's how the apple looks like on a third dimension, but we can see it. As you were to press this, or if this third-dimensional apple was to visit a two-dimensional space, all the two-dimensional space will see is just a whole bunch of circles. So they'll just see the circle getting small, big, 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 and then small, and then probably see some green at the end because those are the leaves. Now, when you look at that, you would be like, wow, a circle visited me. But really what that circle is actually an apple, and the apple would kind of look similar to an orange. The only thing would be difference is color. A sphere would look something like this. Now, if they were intelligent and they try to hypothesize how we try to hypothesize about the fourth dimension, this is how they would hypothesize on the bottom, where they kind of look like they're stacked up on each other. It says how the second dimension would understand the 3D in theory. So they wouldn't really see how it looks like in 3D, but what they would do is they would try to take these little circles, stack them up on each other, and say, technically, if you just imagine that there was an even flow between all this, this is how the second dimension looks. And that is how they would perceive it. So you can see, like, from the dimensions, even from the third dimension, we can see clearly that it's an apple based on its width, height, and length. But on the 2D dimensions, they would just see it as a big circle coming in and a big circle coming out. Now, to go ahead and illustrate this point a little bit further, I have here a concept of someone's which we should call their hands. And what they have here is, let's just say you were to put someone's hand on a piece of paper where the two-dimensional beings are. If you put your fingers there and not your palm, they would see you as, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots. And technically those four dots or 5 dots are all connected to the one being, because you haven't pushed down all of your compression of your hand or actually pushed your whole face. They don't understand that you're much bigger than those dots. So technically they can theorize that either one, you haven't pushed your whole body in, so they can think that you're as big as the dots, but you're not showing yourself. Or they can conceptualize that there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different beings visiting them from the third dimension. So when you realize that, you realize the perception from dimensions can be vastly different than their perception, because they can't really perceive the dimensions. Because even if you were to tell someone on the second dimension, those are just 5 fingerprints of someone on the third dimension, they won't really understand that unless you try to push your whole body through. And even that would be like, what the heck is this? Because they would have to like take the slices of the impressions and try to line them up. And that would be a very an interesting feat to do, nevertheless. So when you realize that this whole concept of the third dimension is interesting, and that's why when you understand they see us as time, they don't really just see the separation, they see the connection, they see how everything's connected. But then the question comes in, is time really the fourth dimension?